What's up, Meta Nerds? This video is all about the Resurgent-class Battlecruiser. It was manufactured by Kuat and Trala Engineering, which shows us that after the Rebel Alliance's victory during the battle for Kuat Drive Yards, the company that brought us all of the amazing walkers for both the Republic and the Empire now reformed itself and aligned with manufacturers that were located in the Outer Rim territories. We saw a similar thing happen in our First Order TIE Fighter video, where Sinar Fleet Systems joined forces with Jameis, becoming Sinar Janus Fleet Systems. And it's very interesting to point out that Trala and Jameis are right next to each other, with the home of the banking clan and one of the wealthiest systems in all of the galaxy positioned right in between them. We saw how Sinar Jameis stuck with what worked and just produced updated versions of their TIE Fighter. Similarly, Kuat and Trala were already seasoned shipbuilders and decided to make capital ships for the First Order, using techniques that they had mastered during the reign of the Empire. Resurgent literally means to revive or come back from a period of little activity, and so just as the First Order could be seen as the resurgence of an Imperial government, the largest and most impressive of their capital ships was named the Resurgent-class Battlecruiser. It was almost twice as long as the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, being 2,915.81 meters long, or 1.8 miles. This thing couldn't fit into the Grand Canyon at its deepest point, and was nearly the exact same length as 3.5 Burj Khalifas. In-universe examples, it was about as long as 233 X-Wings, and nearly as long as 600 Rancors. This enormous size was more than just practical, but it also had a very strong psychological effect, both striking terror into its enemies, and being seen as an enormous sense of pride in the ranks of the First Order. It kept the overall arrowhead or dagger-shaped design of the previous Imperial class, but they had to work in some bracing in the midsection, stronger hull plating in some high-tension areas, and even had to add a truss to help support the upper hull. You might not think these things are important for a space vessel, but keep in mind that like the Imperial-class Star Destroyers before it, this thing had to stay together, going into the varying atmospheres and gravities of different planets. Its complement included 19,000 officers, with 55,000 enlisted personnel. Despite this ship being enormous, the crew was still forced to live and work close together, and each workday was broken up into 6 4-hour-long shifts. To create camaraderie, the enlisted personnel were broken up into 3 different crews, which would stick together as they alternated through their duties. Many areas of this ship were off limits to the enlisted personnel, and different ranks and code cylinders worn by the officers would allow them to get into these different areas. There were large crew recreation areas, as well as a state-of-the-art sickbay if you're ever in the need of a back-to-bath. To save time commuting around a ship that's 1.8 miles long, many of the crew's quarters were near the area that they worked. Like I said, it's still crammed, but at least you didn't have to walk as far, with the area near the primary command bridge being reserved for the senior command staff, the engineering personnel's quarters being located right next to the reactor and the engineering wing, and the main crew quarters being located more towards the middle of the ship. Special Forces barracks are located right above here, and the Stormtrooper barracks are located right underneath the sickbay, and right above the Stormtrooper training complex. And speaking of Stormtroopers, we don't have exact numbers, but it's said that it had a complement of over 8,000 Stormtroopers, which makes a full legion. I'm a bit surprised that we don't have a more accurate and much larger number, given that the Resurgent class doubles the number of officers and enlisted crew that we saw in the Imperial class, but has much less than the 9,700 Stormtroopers that we know were typically on board an Imperial-class Star Destroyer. Stormtroopers on board followed their own chain of command, with the highest being the Captain of the Guard, like Captain Phasma or Captain Cardinal. But during drills or alerts across the ship, Stormtroopers were supposed to follow the orders of the ship's officers. To further help keep things running smoothly, there was a detention center located in the upper midsection, and like the Imperial starships that came before it, they utilized the MSE 6 series repair droids, also known as mouse droids, to carry messages around the Resurgent-class battleship, as well as conduct minor repairs and help keep the place clean. This thing is called a Battlecruiser, and for good reason. This thing has 1,500 turbo laser cannons and 1,500 ion cannons. The Resurgent class was designed with orbital bombardments in mind, and for being able to overpower any opponent in ship-to-ship combat. For comparison, the Imperial-class Star Destroyer had 60 turbo lasers and 60 ion cannons, and it had a couple of extra batteries as well. But if you combine all of them, you're still only looking at about 150, 1/10 of that of the Resurgent class. But of course, it still has less than the Executor-class Star Dreadnought, which was said to have over 5,000 turbo lasers and ion cannons. But to be fair, the Executor class was over 6 times as long as the Resurgent, and so pound for pound, this First Order capital ship had the greatest number of weapons relative to its size. And that doesn't even take into account the point defense turrets and point defense missile emplacements, or even the tractor beam projectors, which sadly we don't have an accurate number on how many there were of these extra weapons. And perhaps most important of all, it's not just that there's more turbo lasers, but that they are all much more powerful and even have a faster recharge rate. This is because the First Order came across a large amount of Kyber crystals, somewhere out in the unknown regions, and was able to integrate the Kyber focusing crystals into these enormous weapons. Of course, all of the captains amongst the First Order wanted to have these Kyber-based turbo lasers worked into their warships, but as you might expect, military-grade crystals were among the rarest materials to come by, and so although they found a ton of them, you would need one of these Kyber crystals for every turbo laser on the ship. Most of these weapons were manned by gunners, but to help with target acquisition, they received tons of data from the multi-spectrum sensor towers, which were located right next to the primary command bridge. The tractor beam projectors were located at the very front of this ship, and the shield projectors were placed on 3 different areas across the ship. One was located up front, 2 in the middle, and this classic dome-shaped shield projector was responsible for protecting the command bridge. This was also amplified by what's called a deflector augmenter that was placed over here. And they also had several strategically placed point defense turrets that would hopefully protect the bridge by disintegrating any ships that came too close, and prevent any New Republic A-Wing equivalent from repeating history. Well, that's it for the Resurgent-class Battlecruiser. In part 2, we'll continue the breakdown, and look at its history, and of course, the cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. Hope to see everybody in part 2.